Rain lashed against the cobblestones. In the darkness of a carriage parked hard against the church wall, a gloved hand tapped on the window pane, slow, deliberate, as though it already knew someone was hiding inside. Outside, lantern light danced through the night. A man's voice called a name into the black emptiness. But the wrong one. He always got it wrong. Every time the anger rose in him. There are cities where women are bought and sold like horses, like parcels of land, like a debt that has finally come due. This was one of them. Footsteps grew heavier on the wet stone. A shadow fell across the glass. Inside the carriage, something, or someone, was holding its breath, waiting, and the only question no one yet dared to ask: why was that carriage parked right here, hard against the church, on this one fateful morning? Its door left open, as if it had been waiting. The carriage smelled of expensive tobacco and rain-soaked leather, and Adelaide Fenwick was hiding on the floor of it. She did not know whose carriage. She did not know who sat in the dark across from her. She only knew the lantern light bobbing past the window, the footsteps on the cobblestones, the voice, his voice, calling her name into the night like a hook cast into black water. Then a shadow fell over the glass, a gloved hand, tapping, slow and deliberate. Jasmine, darling. No, not Jasmine. Her name was Adelaide. But the man hunting her had never once bothered to learn it right when he was angry. Come out now, and I'll be gentle, she whimpered, pressed herself smaller, waited for the stranger in the corner to throw her out into the street. Instead, a hand settled on her trembling shoulder. Warm, steady. Nothing like the other one. He will not touch you, the stranger whispered, low, certain, a vow, not a comfort. I'll protect you. 2 taps on the roof. The carriage rolled forward, smooth, silent, sliding past the furious man with the lantern as if he were no more than a lamppost. And as the horses carried her away into the dark, Adelaide could not shake one single question. Why had this carriage been parked so very near the church? But to understand how she came to be folded on the floor of the most feared man in England, weeping into the velvet, we have to go back. To the morning of the wedding, to the day she was meant to be sold. She woke before the sun did. Adelaide lay still in the dark, listening to the house breathe around her. Old walls, old wood, a house that had once been grand and was now simply tired, the way everyone in it was tired. Somewhere down the hall, a clock tick-ticked. Counting, always counting. And this morning it was counting down to the end of her. She was 22 years old, and in 4 hours she would belong to another man. Not love, not partnership. Belong, like a horse, like a parcel of land, like a debt that finally came due because that was what she was now. A debt down the corridor. She heard it, the crying. Not the soft kind. Not the gentle weeping of a mother sending a daughter off to a happy life. No. This was the other kind. The broken kind. The kind that comes from a woman who has done something terrible and knows it. Guilt has a sound. Adelaide had learned that in this house, and her mother was making it. She closed her eyes. She did not cry. She had no tears left. She had spent them weeks ago. The night her father came home, reeking of brandy, and told her, without quite looking at her face, that the matter was settled, that the arrangements were made, that Garrett Holloway would clear debt the family owed, in exchange for one thing. Her. The house of Fenwick had been falling for years, slowly at first. Then all at once her father's gambling. That was the start of it. A man who believed every single time that the next hand of cards would save him. It never did. Then the bad investments. The loans taken to cover the loans. The servants let go, one by one, until only 2 remained. The paintings sold off the walls, leaving pale ghosts where they had hung for 100 years. The silver, the horses, the good name. And then, when there was nothing left to sell, there was Adelaide. Garrett Holloway came circling the way a thing circles when it smells a wound. A wealthy man. A respected man, if you only asked the men who feared him. He had appeared at her father's club one evening, with an offer dressed up as mercy. Clear the debts. Save the house. Save the family. And all he wanted in return was a wife. She had met him twice. The first time, he looked at her the way a man looks at livestock. His eyes went to her teeth, her posture, her hips. He did not see a person. He saw a purchase, and he was deciding whether she was worth the price. The second time was worse. He had cornered her in the library, backed her against the shelves where no one could see, and he had placed one hand around her throat. Not squeezing, just resting there, warm and heavy and certain. "You'll learn quickly," he had whispered. His breath was brandy and rot. Obedient wives live comfortable lives. The other kind learn to fear the dark. Then he smiled, and let go, and walked away as if nothing had happened. She had not slept properly since. Now the maids came to dress her, 2 of them, the last 2. Quiet women who would not meet her eyes. They laced her into the gown, ivory silk, pearls at the collar, a beautiful thing, paid for by a man who saw her as property, and with every pull of the laces, the corset tightened. Tighter, tighter, until she could not draw a full breath, until her ribs ached, until she felt less like a bride and more like something being sewn into a shroud. That was the word that came to her. Shroud. The veil came down over her face like a curtain falling on a life. Through it, the whole world looked pale, distant, already gone. "You look beautiful, dear," her mother said. But she said it to the mirror, not to Adelaide, because she could not look her daughter in the eyes. And Adelaide understood, in that moment, that her mother had already grieved her, already buried her. The girl in the mirror was a memory now. A story they would tell themselves later, over tea. Poor Adelaide. Married so well. Such a good shot. And they would believe it, because believing it was easier than the truth. The truth was simpler. They had sold her. The church was only 4 blocks away. She was meant to walk there. A grand procession through the streets. All of fashionable London lining the way to watch the Fenwick girl marry into the Holloway fortune. A spectacle. A show. Proof that the family had not fallen so very far, after all. But when she stepped outside into the gray morning, her father was not there. Of course he wasn't. He had gone ahead. Gone to drink himself into enough courage to give her away without his hands shaking. He could not even face the walk. So she walked it without him, flanked by 2 footmen. And here was the thing about those footmen. They were not there to escort her. They were not there for ceremony. Adelaide knew exactly why they were there. She had seen it in the way they stood. One slightly ahead, one slightly behind, boxing her in. They were there to make certain she did not run. But Adelaide had learned something in 22 years of being bargained over and traded and arranged. She had learned to be patient, to watch, to wait for the single moment when the men who owned her looked the other way. And she had learned that the moment always comes. You only have to be ready when it does. They were halfway to the church when it happened. A street vendor's cart, stacked high with apples. One wheel caught a gap in the cobblestones and turned, and the whole thing went over with a crash. Apples everywhere rolling, bouncing, scattering across the wet stones in every direction. And both footmen turned to look, both of them, at the same instant. For one breath, maybe 2, 3 seconds. That was all she had, 3 seconds. Adelaide ran. The satin slippers were useless. She knew at the moment her foot hit the stone. No grip, no purchase, just silk on wet rock. Her ankle nearly went out from under her on the second step. But she did not stop, because stopping meant Garrett. And anything was better than Garrett. She gathered the gown in both fists and hauled it up out of her way, and she ran, behind her, shouting. The footmen had noticed. Of course they had. They were faster. They wore boots. They were not strangling inside a corset. The math was simple. They would catch her in minutes, unless she could disappear first. She tore the veil from her face and let it go. It caught the wind and lifted and floated up behind her like a ghost shedding its body. And she turned, down an alley, narrow, dark. Her lungs were screaming now. The corset crushing every breath into something small and desperate. She had no plan, no money, no friend to run to, no door in all of London that would open for a runaway bride in a ruined wedding dress. She had nothing, except the next step, and the one after that, and the burning in her chest that whispered, anything, anything, anything but him. And that was when she saw it, at the end of the alley, parked in the shadow of the church's own stone wall. A carriage, But not just any carriage. This one was black as a closed eye, lacquered, polished to a shine that drank the gray light rather than give any of it back. And on the door, picked out in silver and deep crimson, a crest, a wolf's head, crowned with thorns. Even Adelaide, who knew little of the great families, knew that crest. Everyone knew that crest. The Duke of Ravenscroft, the man whose name mothers used to frighten children into behaving. The man who had come back from the wars with a face full of scars and a reputation for something colder than cruelty. The man even the powerful crossed the street to avoid. They said he had killed men with his bare hands. They said he felt nothing at all. They said his heart had died somewhere, far away, and his body had simply forgotten to follow it into the ground. And his carriage door was open, just slightly, just a crack, as if it were waiting. Adelaide did not think. There was no time to think. Behind her, the shouting grew closer, and in front of her stood the most feared name in all of London. She chose the juice monster she did not know. She dove inside. She pulled the door shut behind her and collapsed onto the floor between the seats, folded herself into the smallest shape a person can make. Her wedding gown crumpled around her like paper. Her heart slammed so hard against her ribs, she was certain it would give her away. Certain the whole street could hear it, and then she smelled it. Expensive tobacco. Rain-soaked leather. Something rich and dark and male. The carriage was not empty. Slowly, slowly, she lifted her eyes, polished black boots, then trousers, perfectly tailored, then a coat of black velvet threaded through with silver, and then the face, 3 scars, jagged, cutting across his left cheek from temple to jaw, like something had tried to take his face and only half succeeded. Old wounds, healed badly, red against pale skin, and his eyes did not widen, did not narrow, did not do any of the things a man's eyes are supposed to do. When a bride in a torn gown falls out of nowhere onto his floor, he simply looked at her, the way a man might look at a stray cat that has wandered into his study, mildly inconvenienced, faintly curious, entirely unbothered. For a long moment neither of them spoke. Then he did. "You're bleeding on my upholstery." Adelaide looked down her hands, scraped raw from the fall, small cuts weeping red into her torn gloves onto the pale velvet of the floor. Her voice came out as nothing, a scrape of air. She tried again. "I'm sorry I didn't. You're the Fenwick girl." It was not a question. She stared at him. "The one being sold to Holloway today," he said flatly. "The way you might read a name off a list. Half of London has talked of nothing else for a week." She could not answer. Her throat had closed. He leaned back against the seat, studied her with that cold, patient detachment. A man with all the time in the world and very little interest in how she chose to spend it. "Does he know you're here?" "No," the word tumbled out. "No, I ran. I didn't know where to go. She stopped. Heard how small she sounded, how pathetic. A grown woman curled on a floor, begging a stranger. "Please, please don't send me back to him. Why would I do that?" His tone was almost bored. "Holloway's business is no concern of mine." "Then let me go." She gripped the edge of the seat. "Please, just let me go and I'll vanish. You'll never see me again. No one will ever know I was here." His eyes narrowed. "Just slightly. You misunderstand." His voice did not rise. It did not need to. "I'm not keeping you because of Holloway. I'm keeping you because you are, at this moment, trespassing in my carriage. And I do not make decisions while a frightened woman shouts at me from my own floor." And before she could find a reply, the street found them. Voices, outside, close, footsteps, cobblestones, shadows moving past the tinted glass, searching, calling, check every carriage. A voice she knew, a voice that had once whispered against her ear with brandy on its breath. She couldn't have gone far in that dress. Find her, Garrett. Adelaide's blood turned to water. She looked up at the Duke, her eyes begging where her voice could not. But his face had not changed. He simply watched her, clinical, waiting, it seemed, to see what she would do. The footsteps came closer. A shadow fell across the window. She stopped breathing, the door handle rattled. And then the Duke moved. One smooth motion. He reached down and took her by the arms and lifted her up off the floor and onto the seat beside him. Before she could understand it, before she could even gasp, he swept his heavy cloak off his shoulders and threw it over her, covered her completely, and drew one arm around her, pulling her into his side, against the velvet of his coat, so that to anyone looking through that glass there was only a duke, alone, his cloak heaped carelessly beside him. "Don't move," he breathed. Barely a sound at all. "Don't breathe too loud." The door swung open. Cold air rushed in, and with it came Garrett Holloway's voice. "Your Grace, careful, polished, respectful on the surface, but underneath it, simmering, the rage of a man whose property had walked off. Forgive the intrusion. I'm searching for someone. A young woman, in a wedding gown. Have you seen her?" A pause. "I've seen a great many young women today." The Duke's voice was flat, dead level, the voice of a man remarking on the weather. "London is full of them. You'll have to be more specific. This one is my bride. A beat. She's unwell, confused, not in her right mind. I need to find her before she does herself harm." How tragic. There was nothing in those two words. No sympathy, no warmth, nothing at all. But as you can see, Holloway, I am alone, and I am already late for an appointment I have no intention of missing. Close the door, if I could only. Close the door, and here is the strange thing. He did not shout, he did not move. But something in those three words made the air inside that carriage go cold and still. Something that made even Adelaide, hidden and silent beneath his cloak, feel her own heart stutter and skip. A long silence. Then footsteps. Retreating, and the door clicked shut. Neither of them moved, not for a long time. They sat there in the dark while the voices outside drifted further down the street. Searching the wrong direction. Searching for a ghost. And only when the last sound had faded entirely did the Duke lift the cloak away. Adelaide blinked up at him. Her face was wet. She had not even known she was crying. "Why did you?" She could not finish it. "I don't like Holloway," he said simply. He reached up and tapped the roof of the carriage. Twice. The horses began to move. Smooth, silent, pulling them away from the church, away from the alley, away from the man who had hunted her through the streets like an animal. "And I have no patience," he added, almost to himself, "for men who hunt women through the streets like animals." "Where are we going?" "Ravenscroft Hall." "But her mind spun. "I can't. You don't understand. I have nowhere to go. No money. My family will disown me for this. Holloway will tell everyone I'm mad. A runaway." Then it's fortunate," he said, "that none of them are your concern anymore." He turned and looked at her fully. For the first time, and in the dim light his scarred face gave away nothing at all. "You're mine now." The words should have terrified her. They sounded like ownership. Like she had simply traded one master for another. Like she had leapt out of one cage, straight into a darker one. And yet there was something in the way he said it. Flat, final, and strangely without hunger. Garrett had said words like that, and they had crawled across her skin like spiders. The Duke said them the way another man might say the rain has stopped. A fact. Nothing more. He reached into his coat and drew out a handkerchief, held it out to her. "You're still bleeding." She took it with trembling fingers. "Thank you," she whispered. He said nothing. He turned back to the window and watched the gray city slide past, but Adelaide, pressed into the far corner of the seat, wrapping the cloth around her torn palms, could not stop one thought from circling. Around and around. A small cold question she could not silence. The alley, his carriage, parked at the end of that alley, in the shadow of the church. On the morning of her wedding, door open. Waiting. Why? Of all the streets in all of London. Why there? Why then? She did not have an answer, but she had a feeling, deep in her chest, that the answer was not chance. The ride took nearly an hour. She spent most of it in silence, pressed against the door, watching him from the corner of her eye, waiting for the demand she was certain would come. Every man wanted something. She had learned that lesson well. The only question was ever the price. But the Duke asked for nothing. He simply sat, still as stone, his attention fixed on something beyond the glass that only he could see. And when at last they passed through tall iron gates, worked with that same wolf and thorns crest, she felt her breath catch in her throat. The house rose up before them, like something out of a dark dream. Gray stone that seemed to swallow the afternoon light rather than give any of it back. Towers at every corner, narrow windows, dozens of them, staring down like watchful eyes. It was beautiful, but it was the kind of beauty that did not want you there. A cathedral built for some cold god of winter. The carriage stopped. Servants in dark livery appeared at once, opening the door, bowing low. The Duke stepped down first, then turned, and held out his hand to her. She hesitated. She looked down at herself. The ruined gown, the bloodied hands, the bare feet, because somewhere in the running she had lost both slippers. She looked like something dragged up out of the river. "I can't," she whispered. "Not like this, they'll see. Everyone will see exactly what everyone," the Duke said, "will see precisely what I permit them to see. Nothing more." His hand stayed where it was, steady, patient, asking nothing, demanding nothing. Simply offered. She took it. She stepped down onto the gravel, and the small stones bit into her bare and bleeding feet, and she could not help the small sound of pain that escaped her. And without a single word, the Duke of Ravenscroft bent and swept her up into his arms. She gasped, clutched at his coat on instinct. "Your Grace, I can walk, not on those feet." He carried her up the stone steps, as though she weighed nothing at all. Inside, the hall was vast and cold and echoing. "Mrs. Pennington," he called. A woman appeared from a side corridor, severe, gray-haired, buttoned to the throat in black. She took one look at the bleeding girl in the Duke's arms, and something in her stern face shifted, softened, into something almost like a mother's worry. "Prepare the East Wing's suite," the Duke said. "Have a bath drawn, clothes laid out, and send for the doctor to see to her hands and her feet. At once, Your Grace." The housekeeper's eyes moved over Adelaide, quick and assessing. "Will the young lady be staying long?" A pause. "Indefinitely," he said. He set Adelaide down, gently, in a deep chair beside an enormous fireplace where a fire had already begun to crackle and snap. "See that she has everything she needs." Mrs. Pennington curtsied and swept away, calling out orders to servants who seemed to materialize from the very shadows of the place. And Adelaide looked up at the Duke, who was already turning to leave. "Wait." Her voice stopped him. "I don't understand. Why are you doing this? What do you want from me?" He paused. For a long moment he did not answer, and when he finally spoke, his voice had gone quiet, almost distant, as if he were speaking to someone who was not in the room. "I want you to rest." To heal, he did not turn around, to remember what it feels like to be safe. Then, over his shoulder, the smallest glance. His scarred face half in shadow, half in firelight. "We'll discuss the rest tomorrow. For now, recover." And as for Holloway, something moved in his eyes. Something old, something dark. "He is no longer your problem. He is mine. And I have been waiting a very long time to settle accounts with that man." And before she could ask what on earth he meant by that, he was gone, his footsteps fading down the long stone corridor. They took care of her. That was the strangest part. The part Adelaide could not make sense of as she lay, hours later, in a bed larger than her family's entire morning room. They had bathed her in water that smelled of lavender, washed her hair, cleaned and bound her hands, wrapped her cut feet in soft linen. The doctor had come and found nothing broken and told her she would heal with rest, and no one had asked her for anything. No one had looked at her the way Garrett looked at her. No one had touched her the way Garrett touched her. For the first time in longer than she could remember, no one in the room wanted to own her. She lay in the dark of that great strange house and waited for the catch, the trick, the price that surely was coming. But sleep came first. It pulled her under like a tide, before she could find the price at all. She woke to afternoon light. For one merciful moment she did not remember. And then it all came rushing back. The wedding, the alley, the carriage, the scarred face, and the cold eyes and the words, "You're mine now." A dress had been laid out for her, deep burgundy wool, simple, warm, none of the suffocating layers of the gown they had buried her in the day before. She dressed slowly, her body ached, but she was alive, and she was not married to Garrett Holloway. And those two facts, taken together, felt very close to a miracle. That was when she found it. She had been looking for nothing in particular, just crossing the room, and her eye caught on the writing desk in the corner. A drawer not quite closed. A single sheet of paper caught in it, half pulled free. She should not have looked. She knew she should not have looked. She looked. A name leapt off the page at her. Fenwick. Her father's name. And beneath it, her mother's. And a sum of money so large it stopped the breath in her throat. A debt notice. 3 years old. Her father had borrowed an enormous sum, secured against the house, against everything. And the lender, written in a hard black hand at the foot of the page, His Grace, the Duke of Ravenscroft. Adelaide sat down very slowly in the chair beside the desk, because suddenly the alley made sense. Because suddenly the open carriage door made sense. Because suddenly all of it made a terrible, cold, perfect kind of sense. He had not saved her. He had collected her. He had owned her family's debt for 3 years. 3 years, which meant the carriage parked at the end of that alley on the morning of her wedding, door open and waiting, had not been chance at all. It had been arithmetic. He had known. Somehow, he had known she would run, and he had been there, waiting. The way a patient man waits for a thing he is already owed, she had not escaped one master. She had run, weeping and grateful and bleeding, straight into the arms of another. The door opened. The Duke stepped in, already speaking. "I thought you might like to ride out before the light goes, the grounds are." He stopped. His eyes dropped to the paper in her hands, to her face, and whatever he saw there made him go very still. "You weren't meant to find that," he said quietly. "No," she rose. Her legs did not feel entirely her own. The paper trembled in her grip. "No, I don't imagine I was." She held it up between them. A small white flag of a thing. A surrender. A weapon. She was not yet sure which. "How long," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "How long have you owned my family, Your Grace?" He did not look away. To his credit, or perhaps to his shame, he did not look away. 3 years. The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into a deep, still well, and Adelaide stood in that beautiful borrowed dress, in that beautiful borrowed room, in the house of the most feared man in London, and understood that she had not, after all, been saved. She had only changed hands. And far across the gray and waking city, Garrett, Holloway, was already plotting how to get her back. For 3 days, Adelaide did not speak to him. She moved through Ravenscroft Hall like a ghost learning the shape of its haunting. The library, the long gallery with its dark portraits, the cold gardens where autumn had stripped the roses down to thorns. She walked, and she thought, and she turned the same question over and over in her hands like a stone worn smooth. He had owned her for 3 years, 3 years, and he had said nothing. Until she found it herself, she told herself she hated him. It was simpler that way. Cleaner. A monster who collected people was easier to live beside than a man who confused her. So she held on to the hatred the way you hold on to a railing in the dark. Except the hatred kept slipping, because he did not act like a man who owned her. He left her alone. He gave orders that she was to have anything she asked for. The kitchens were hers. The library was hers. A maid appeared each morning with warm water and clean linen, and no demands at all. And at dinner, when she finally consented to sit at his table again, he did not gloat. He did not press. He simply ate in silence and let her hate him in peace, which was somehow the most infuriating thing of all. The whispers started on the 4th day. A maid brought it up from the village, wrapped in the hush of gossip. A story. Racing through London like fire through dry grass. The Fenwick girl had vanished from her own wedding, and the most feared duke in England had stolen her away. Some said she'd been kidnapped. Some said she'd been bewitched. Some said the Gussard monster of Ravenscroft had finally taken a bride, the way a wolf takes a lamb. And Garrett Holloway, the story went, was telling anyone who would listen that his bride had lost her mind, that she had run mad on her wedding day, that she needed to be found, for her own protection, before she hurt herself. Adelaide listened to all of it, with her hands very still in her lap, because that was Garrett's first move. She understood it at once. He could not take her back by force, not from a duke. So he would do the next best thing. He would poison the air. He would make her a madwoman, and himself a worried husband. And if enough people believed it, the law itself might come knocking. To rescue her, right back into his arms. Clever. She would give him that. He had always been clever. That evening, she went to find the Duke, not to forgive him. She told herself that very firmly on the way down the stairs. Not to forgive him, only to understand. Because a woman fighting for her life cannot afford to misunderstand the men around her. She found him in his study, surrounded by papers. A glass of something amber untouched at his elbow. He did not look up. "He's calling me mad," she said. "I know, he'll keep at it. Until someone official believes him. I know that too." She crossed her arms. "And you're sitting here, reading." He set down his pen and looked at her. And for the first time since she'd found that wretched paper, his eyes were not cold. They were tired. "What would you have me do, Miss Fenwick? Ride into the city and strike him down in the street?" A thin breath, almost a laugh. "Not quite. It would feel very good, for about an hour. And then they would hang me. And you'd be his again, by Sunday." She had no answer to that. "Holloway does not fight with fists," he said. "He fights with whispers, with paper, with ruined names. So that is how he must be answered." He gestured at the documents spread before him. Slowly, carefully, and completely, she looked at the papers. At the careful black columns of a man building something patient and enormous. What is all this? He was quiet a moment. Everything Garrett Holloway would prefer the world never knew. The next blow came 2 days later. And this one drew blood. A maid. One of the newer girls. Caught in the corridor outside the Duke's study late at night, her ear pressed to the door, a folded note half hidden in her apron. Mrs. Pennington dragged her into the great hall by the wrist, white-faced with fury. The girl wept, confessed everything in a tumble. She had been paid, a man in the village. Coin pressed into her hand and a problem of more. All she had to do was listen and report anything she heard about the Duke, about the girl, about the papers on his desk, a spy in the house. Adelaide stood at the top of the stairs and watched it all and felt the cold creep back into her bones. Because this was the second move. Garrett had eyes inside these walls now. Or he had, until tonight. And a terrible question rose in her. How long had the girl been listening? How much had she already carried back? The Duke came, looked at the weeping maid for a long silent moment. And then, to Adelaide's surprise, he did not rage. He crouched down to the girl's level. "How much did he offer you?" The girl named a sum. Pitiful. A few coins. Something passed across his scarred face. Not anger. Something closer to sorrow. "He buys people cheaply," the Duke said softly. "He always has." He straightened. "Pay her what she's owed for her time here, and send her home, not to him. Home to her own people." He looked at the trembling girl. "Tell Holloway whatever you like. It changes nothing. There is nothing in this house he can use." But Adelaide saw the truth of it in the set of his jaw. There was something in this house he could use. There was her. She could not sleep that night. So she did what she always did when sleep would not come. She went to the library. The fire was low. The house was still. And she pulled a book from the shelf almost at random. Something on old military campaigns. And behind it, wedged into the dark gap, where the wood met the wall, a leather folder. Her hands knew before her mind did. She drew it out. Sat down on the cold floor with the firelight throwing long shadows across the spines. And she opened it. Inside were not debt notices. Inside was a life, letters. Old ones, the ink gone brown with years. A miniature portrait, no bigger than her palm. A young woman with dark hair and a soft, laughing face. And on the back of the portrait, in a careful hand, a single name, Beatrix. Adelaide turned the letters over with great care. She knew she was trespassing. Not in a carriage this time. In something far more private. In a grief. But she could not stop. That was how he found her. He came in near midnight, expecting the room empty, and found her on the floor instead, the folder open in her lap, the little portrait caught in the firelight. He went still in the doorway. "That is not yours to read," he said. But there was no anger in it, only something raw. No. She did not put it down. But I think it's time someone told me the truth. All of it. You promised me that, the first night. You said no more half-explanations. She looked up at him. Who was she? For a long moment she thought he would turn and walk away. Instead, and sat down, across from her. Like a boy. This great feared man, with the fire between them. And he began to speak. Her name was Beatrix, he said. And 5 years ago I failed her. The story came out slowly. In pieces. Like a wound being unwrapped. 5 years ago the Duke of Ravenscroft had been a younger man. Softer, he said, though Adelaide could not quite imagine it. He had believed then that a good man with enough courage could simply stand in front of cruelty and make it stop. Beatrix had been a merchant's daughter. No great fortune, no family to speak of. And Garrett Holloway had won her, not for love, for her father's shipping connections. For the ports the family could open to him, she had refused him. So Garrett had gone to work. It started small, the Duke said. He stared into the fire. Threats with no name on them. Then her father's warehouse caught fire. Then his ships began to have accidents. Then his partners disappeared, one by one, as if some hand were closing slowly around the whole family's throat. And you tried to stop him, Adelaide whispered. I tried to stop him, his mouth twisted. I was a fool. I challenged him in public, threatened to expose his methods to anyone who would listen. I thought a man's reputation was a shield, a pause. It is only a shield if you are willing to die behind it. I was not yet that brave. His hand rose, almost without his knowing it, and touched the scars on his cheek. He sent men. 4 of them. They caught me in an alley. His voice did not shake, and somehow that was worse than if it had. They held me down. And Holloway watched. He told them where to cut. He wanted it to scar. He wanted everyone, for the rest of my life, to see what happens to a man who interferes with Garrett Holloway. Adelaide's hand had risen to her own mouth. She did not remember moving it, and Beatrix? She married him a month later. The fire popped. The shadows lurched. I tried to stop the wedding too, but she begged me not to. She said if I came near her again, he would kill her father, and she believed it. So did I. He drew a slow breath. She married him to save her family. And 6 months later, she was dead. How, they said. Pneumonia. His eyes were very far away now, in another room, in another year. I forced my way in to see her 2 weeks before the end. There were marks on her throat, the exact size and shape of a man's hand. He did not need to spread his fingers. The silence did it for him. I swore on her grave. The Duke said that I would destroy him, not kill him. Death is too quick, too kind. I swore I would take everything. His money, his name, his freedom. Everything he had ever stolen from anyone, I would take back and burn in front of him. He finally looked at her. And then 5 years passed. And he found another girl with no one to protect her. And arranged another wedding. And I sat in my carriage at the end of an alley near a church. On the morning of that wedding, his jaw tightened. Not to collect a debt. Miss Fenwick. To stop a funeral before it could be arranged, Adelaide could not breathe, because everything had just turned over. Agon. The next blow came from the last place she expected. Her own blood. She had been searching the folder for more of Beatrix. Instead, between 2 old letters, she found a different page, newer. A copy of a court record, 5 years old. A hearing. An accusation against the young Duke of Ravenscroft in the months after the attack. A charge of starting a brawl. Of attacking Garrett Holloway without cause. Of being a violent, unstable man. And the witness. The man who had stood up and sworn under oath that he had seen the Duke strike first. That the scars were the Duke's own doing. That Holloway had only defended himself. The name on the testimony was Fenwick, her father. Adelaide read it 3 times before the letters would hold still. Her father had lied. Under oath. To save Garrett Holloway's reputation and bury the Duke's. Her father had taken Holloway's coin 5 years ago. The same way that Maid had taken it last week. And he had stood in a courtroom and helped paint the man who saved her as a monster. Which meant the debt 3 years ago was not the beginning. Her family had been tangled with Garrett Holloway long before her wedding. long before her father's gambling spiraled out of control. Her father had not stumbled into Holloway's web by accident. He had walked into it, years ago, with his eyes open and his hand out, and then sold his own daughter to the same man. To clean up the mess, she felt sick. "You knew," she said, when she found the Duke again. Her voice shook. "You knew my father did this. You've known the whole time." "Yes, and you said nothing. Because it was not yours to carry." He stood by the window, his back to her. "You did not lie in that courtroom. He did. The sins of the father, Miss Fenwick, are the father's, not the daughter's." He turned. "I do not blame you for what your father's hand wrote 5 years ago." She stared at him. This man her father had helped destroy, who had then bought her family's debt to keep them from worse men, who had sat in an alley to save her from a fate he himself had barely survived. "Why?" she said. "Why be kind to the family that ruined you?" "Because," he said simply, "I am tired of letting Garrett Holloway decide who deserves cruelty." The papers burned that night, not Beatrix's letters, those he kept, but the debt, the loan against the house, the contract with her father's name on it. He gathered every page that bound the Fenwick family to him, and he carried them to the fire and held them out over the flames. "Wait," Adelaide said. "Why?" "Because these exist," he said. "You cannot know if you stayed for the right reasons." He let the first page fall. It blackened, curled. "I will not be another man who owns you, not even kindly, not even gently." Owning kindly is still owning. The fire took them all. The debt, the contract, the single legal thread that tied her to him. When the last page was ash, he turned. "You owe me nothing," he said. "Not one coin, not 1 hour, not one word. You are free, completely free. For the first time in your life. If you wish to leave Ravenscroft, I will give you money and references, and put you on a coach to anywhere in the world. And you will never hear my name again." Adelaide looked at the ashes, then at him. "And if I want to stay, then you stay as my equal, never my property. The choice is entirely yours. It always should have been." Garrett's next move came by letter. A footman brought it on a silver tray 3 days later. No crest, no seal, just her name, in a hand she would have known anywhere, because it had once been pressed against her throat. She read it standing in the great hall, and the cold came back. But it was a different cold now, not fear. So something harder. He had given up calling her mad. He had a better blade now. He wrote that he had found new use for the old court record, the one with her father's name on it. He wrote that if she did not come back to him, quietly, within the week, he would see her father charged with perjury. An old crime, yes, but provable. And he would not stop there. He would drag her mother into it, the whole family. He would finish the ruin he had started years ago, and this time there would be no house left. No name left, nothing left, unless Adelaide came home, like a good wife, like an obedient one. For a long moment, she stood very still, and then a strange thing happened. She waited for the old feeling, the shrinking, the making herself small, the voice that had lived in her for years, whispering that she was a thing to be traded, a debt to be paid, a problem to be quietly removed. It did not come, because something in her had changed inside these cold, gray walls. Something a scarred man had done, not by saving her, but by handing her a choice and a fistful of ashes and stepping back. She had stopped being someone things happened to. The Duke found her, with the letter still in her hand. "He's threatened my family," she said. "Perjury. He'll ruin them. All of them. Unless I go back." His face went dark as a storm front. "Then he has signed his own warrant. Blackmail in writing, in his own hand. Give it to me. I'll have him before a magistrate by—" "No." He stopped. "No?" She set the letter down on the table between them, and she looked up at him, and there was something new in her face, something he had not seen there before, not in the carriage, not in the firelight, not in all the days under his roof. There was a plan in it. "You've been trying to destroy him for 5 years, she said, carefully, from the shadows, building your case page by page, waiting for the perfect quiet moment." She shook her head slowly. "But Garrett doesn't fall in the quiet. I know him. I sat across from him. I watched him work. His weakness isn't his crimes. It's his pride. The Duke went very still. Listening, he cannot bear to be made small in front of people he wants to impress, she said. He needs an audience for his cruelty. So we give him one. She tapped the letter. Not a magistrate's office, not a courtroom. Somewhere public, somewhere grand. Somewhere all of London is watching. Where his pride won't let him stay silent, and his temper won't let him stay safe. The Royal Masquerade, the Duke said slowly. A fortnight from now. Half the kingdom will be there. The king himself, he'll be there too. He'd never miss it. His vanity won't allow it. Adelaide's eyes were burning now. And when he sees me, on your arm, unbroken, wearing your name in front of everyone he's ever wanted to impress, she let the thought finish itself. He'll do something foolish, the Duke breathed. He'll do something foolish. In front of witnesses. And then your 5 careful years and his 1 careless moment will meet in the same room. She lifted her chin, and we end it. Together, for a long moment, the Duke of Ravenscroft simply looked at her. And then something happened to his ruined face that she had not seen before. The scars did not vanish, but they seemed, somehow, to soften. The cold lifted, and in its place came something that was almost a smile. You are going to be a great deal of trouble, he said. Aren't you, Your Grace? And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Adelaide felt the corner of her own mouth lift. I certainly hope so. He held out his hand. Not to carry her this time, not to hide her. To shake. Partners then. She took it. His grip was warm, steady. Partners. The night of the Royal Masquerade. All of London came to glitter. The King's Palace blazed with 1,000 candles. Carriages stretched down the long drive like a river of black lacquer and gold. And inside, beneath ceilings painted with gods and angels, the most powerful people in England turned and danced and whispered behind masks. Adelaide Fenwick stepped down from the carriage into all of it. She wore a gown of deep emerald silk, cut clean and simple. The kind of dress that does not beg for attention but commands it anyway. A silver mask covered the upper half of her face, set with small emeralds that caught the light when she turned her head. Her dark hair was swept up. Her spine was straight. Weeks ago, she had run through these streets in satin slippers, bleeding, weeping, with no name and no future. Tonight she walked up the palace steps, as though she had been born to climb them. Beside her, the Duke wore black, as he always did. But his mask was plain silver, and somehow it did not hide the scars at all. It framed them, made them part of the architecture of his face. He did not look like a man ashamed of what had been done to him. He looked like a man who had survived it. Ready? He murmured. No, she said. Let's go anyway. The ballroom fell silent when they entered, not all at once. It rippled outward from the doors like a stone dropped in still water. Heads turned. Conversations died midword. Hundreds of masked faces swung toward them, and Adelaide felt the weight of every single stair land on her shoulders. The whispers began at once. A low hum of scandal and hunger. That's her. The Fenwick girl, the runaway bride. That's him, the monster. He stole her from the church. She let them whisper. She had expected the whispers. She had counted on them. The Duke led her into the room with perfect, unhurried calm. He nodded to men who would not quite meet his eye, and when the herald announced them, his voice rang out across the Muckhall and turned every remaining head. The Duke and Duchess of Ravenscroft. The title felt strange in her own ears. Borrowed. A costume she had not yet grown into, but she lifted her chin and wore it anyway. They danced first. That had been the plan. Be seen. Be undeniable. Make the lie so beautiful and so public that no one could quite remember it was a lie. The Duke, it turned out, danced beautifully. She had not expected that. He moved through the waltz with an ease that seemed impossible for a man so often described as a beast. You're staring, he said quietly. You can dance. I had a misspent youth. You? Misspent? Don't sound so surprised. Duchess, it's unflattering to us both. She almost laughed. Almost. In the middle of the most dangerous room in England, with her whole future balanced on a knife's edge, this scarred man had nearly made her laugh. Then his expression changed. The smallest shift, he's here, he said. She did not turn. Where? By the refreshment table. Watching us, a beat, pretending not to. What's his face doing? Calculating. Good, Adelaide said softly. Let him calculate. For 2 hours, they played the part, they circulated, they charmed. Adelaide spoke with countesses and ambassadors and let them study her, this mysterious new duchess who had tamed the untamable. She smiled at the right moments. She turned aside the cruel questions with grace, and slowly she felt the room change its mind about her. She was not a scandal. She was a story, and everyone, she had learned, wants to stand near a good story, but all the while, beneath the music and the candlelight, she was watching, because Garrett would not endure this. She knew it the way she knew her own name. A man like that could not stand in a corner and watch the woman he believed he owned dance in another man's arms while all of London applauded. His pride would not let him. His pride never could. She noticed the servants in the second hour, 3 of them. The first kept glancing toward a side door when he should have been pouring wine. The second stood too long near the balcony exit, hands empty, eyes moving. And the third had drifted close, too close, hovering at the edge of every conversation she and the Duke had, as though collecting their words. And their uniforms were almost right. But not quite. The cut was wrong at the shoulder. The buttons a shade too bright. These were not palace staff, these were Garrett's men, dressed as servants, planted around the room like teeth in a closing jaw. Crispin, she said, the first time she had used his name. It stopped him mid-sentence with the French ambassador. Something's wrong. What? 3 of them. The servants. They're his. The uniforms are wrong. And they watch the exits, not the guests. His eyes swept the room without seeming to move at all. Found the first man. The second. The third. He's not here to argue, the Duke murmured. He's here to take you, in the chaos. When no one's looking. The balcony, most likely. Out into the dark. Away from witnesses, the cold touched her spine. Then we leave, he said. Now, he took her arm, turned them both toward the great doors. And that was when the first false servant dropped his tray. The crash was, crystal exploding across marble. The whole ballroom flinching toward the sound. Every masked face turning at once toward the shattered glass. And in that single breath of distraction, Garrett Holloway stepped directly into their path. He had not bothered with a mask. He wanted to be seen. Duchess, he said, and his voice carried, pitched to fill the sudden hush. How lovely. I was just telling these gentlemen the most fascinating story about your marriage. 2 palace officials stood at his shoulders. Real ones. He had brought witnesses of his own. The Duke moved half a step, putting his body between them. Step aside, Holloway. I'm only concerned for the lady. Garrett's smile was a beautiful, poisonous thing. You see, there are rumors that the Duke here used her family's debts to force her into marriage. That she was never given a choice at all. He turned to the gathering crowd, playing them like a fiddle. I've brought documentation. Proof that His Grace held this poor girl's family in his grip on the very morning of her wedding. The whispers swelled. Adelaide felt the room begin to tilt against them. That's a lie, she said. But it came out smaller than she wanted, because it wasn't entirely a lie. He had held the debt, the paper had been real, and Garrett, watching her face, saw the flicker of doubt and pounced. Was it? He spread his hands to the crowd. The very picture of reluctant concern. A penniless girl, fleeing one marriage, only to be claimed at once by the very man who owned her family's future. The timing is rather convenient, don't you think? Perhaps the poor creature was never free to choose at all, and there it was, his whole plan, laid bare in a single elegant stroke. He could not take her by force from a duke, so he would make her a victim, make the marriage a crime, make himself the rescuer. And if he convinced enough of the right people, the king himself might intervene, annul it, hand her back. She saw the doubt blooming on the faces around her. Friendly faces, 3 minutes ago, now uncertain. She felt the old fear rise up to swallow her. And then she remembered the ashes in the fireplace, the choice he had given her, the hand he had offered to shake as an equal, and she stopped being afraid. She stepped forward, out from behind the Duke's protecting arm, into the open. into the center of the circle where every eye in the room could find her. "The documents you describe," she said, and her voice did not shake now, "were burned. By His grace. At my request. The debt no longer exists. At your request." Garrett's tone dripped sympathy. "Or at His command. My dear, it's plain you've been manipulated. No one blames you." "The only person who ever manipulated me," Adelaide said, "was you." The room went very quiet. "You threatened me. In my own father's library. You told me what obedient wives could expect." Her voice rose, clear and ringing, carrying to every corner. "You bought my family like livestock and called it a marriage. His grace gave me a choice." She turned slowly to the watching crowd. "You never gave me anything but fear." "This is absurd," Garrett snapped. The mask of concern was slipping. "Your Grace." He appealed to one of the officials. "Surely you see this woman needs protection from you," Adelaide said. And then she went for his throat. "Everyone in this room knows your name, Mr. Holloway. And everyone in this room remembers what happened to Beatrix." A gasp somewhere, the name dropping like a blade. "Your first wife. Dead, 6 months after she married you." "Pneumonia," they said. She held his eyes. "But we both know what was around her throat at the end, don't we?" The crowd's murmur changed. It was no longer the hum of scandal. It had become something darker, something with an edge to it, because everyone had heard the old story of Beatrix. Everyone had whispered it. But no one had ever dared say it aloud. In a room, to his face, Garrett's careful composure cracked straight down the middle. "You have no proof," he hissed. "Of anything?" "No," Adelaide agreed. And she turned to the Duke. "But he does." The Duke of Ravenscroft reached into his coat. He did not hurry. He had waited 5 years for this. He could afford to be slow. He drew out a thick folder, bound and worn. The work of half a decade of patient nights. "Funny you should mention proof, Holloway," he said, and his voice was winter itself. "I have here a record of every illegal arrangement you've made in the last 10 years. Bribes, extortion, the officials you've bought." His eyes flicked, deliberately, to the 2 men at Garrett's shoulders, both of whom suddenly looked as though the floor had turned to ice. "Some of whom, I notice, are standing very close to you tonight." The 2 officials stepped back, quickly, as if from a man on fire, and then the Duke went on. "There is the cargo from Calais, last spring. The girls you brought in and listed as domestic servants." His voice dropped, and the whole silent room leaned in to hear it. The youngest was 14 years old. "I have the bills of I have the witnesses. I have all of it." Garrett's face had gone the color of ash. "Shall I read it aloud?" the Duke asked, almost gently. "Here, in front of the King's own court? Or would you rather leave with what little dignity you have left? You're bluffing." The ship was the Marguerite. It docked on the 11th of April. "You paid the harbor master £40 to look the other way. His name was Coombe. He has already spoken to my people." A pause. "Am I still bluffing?" Garrett Holloway opened his mouth, and nothing came out. For one moment, Adelaide thought it was over. She thought she would watch the proud man crumble, watch the room turn its back, watch 5 years of patience collect its debt at last. But cornered animals do not surrender. They lunge. Garrett's hand moved, not toward his coat, toward the wall, toward a small bronze lever beside the heavy velvet curtains, half hidden. The kind of thing a servant might use. She did not understand. Until the smoke began to pour under the balcony doors. Someone screamed. Then everyone did. Thick gray smoke rolled into the ballroom, fast, choking. And the great glittering crowd became a single panicking beast. Hundreds of people surging at once toward the doors, masks torn off, candles knocked to the floor, the orchestra scattering, instruments crashing down. Fire. Someone shrieked it. Fire. Fire. It was Garrett's last plan. She understood it, even as the chaos swallowed her. If he could not win with words, he would win with smoke. Separate her from the Duke. Snatch her in the confusion. Vanish before anyone could count who was missing. "Stay with me," the Duke shouted, and his hand found her arm. But the crowd was a flood now, a wall of bodies, and it tore them apart in an instant, ripping his grip from her, sweeping her sideways like a leaf in a storm. Crispin. She could not see him. She could not see anything but elbows and silk and smoke. And then a hand closed around her arm, not his. The hand yanked her backward, hard. She twisted to look. One of the false servants. His grip like iron, dragging her not toward the exits with the crowd, but away from them, toward a side corridor, toward the dark. She opened her mouth to scream. A second hand clamped over it, the taste of leather and salt. He hauled her off her feet, half carrying her through a service door, away from the noise, away from the people, away from anyone who could help. This was it. This was the whole plan. Take her in the chaos. And Adelaide Fenwick decided, in that smoke-filled corridor, that she was finished being taken. She bit down hard. Her teeth found the meat of his hand, and she bit until she tasted blood. And the man bellowed, and his grip loosened just enough, just enough. She wrenched free, and she ran, up a narrow servant's staircase, the smoke thinning as she climbed, her lungs burning, her emerald gown gathered in both fists. She had no idea where she was going. She only knew it had to be up, and away, and now behind her. Footsteps, more than one set. He had not come alone. She burst through a door at the top and found herself in a private study. Books, a cold hearth, a single great window. She slammed the door and threw the bolt and spun around, looking for another way out. There was none, only the window. 3 stories up, the handle behind her rattled. Then something heavy struck the door. The wood groaned, struck again. A crack split the panel. Adelaide ran into the and threw it open and looked down, and nearly fell forward from the dizziness of it. 3 floors below, the gardens, black and far away. And running along the outside of the wall just beneath the window, a narrow stone ledge, barely wide enough for 2 feet, leading to a balcony, perhaps 15 feet away, where a door stood open to the night, 15 feet, on a ledge the width of a book, 3 stories above the ground. It was madness. The door behind her splintered again. A man's shoulder, man's curse, was the only road left. She climbed out. The night air hit her like cold water. The wind caught her gown and snapped it around her legs. She pressed her back flat against the rough stone. And she did not look down. She would not look down. She fixed her eyes on the balcony, 15 feet away, and she began to move, 1 foot. Then the other, bit through her thin silk slippers. Her fingers spread against the wall behind her, searching for any seam, any grip, any small mercy in the cold stone. Behind her, the study door gave way. She heard it crash, heard a man's voice, close now. She went out the window. She's on the ledge. She moved faster, too fast. Her foot slipped, for one white. Endless second, the world fell away beneath her. Her stomach dropped. Her body pitched. 1 foot found nothing but air, and the dark gardens rushed up at her. And a sound tore out of her that she did not recognize as her own. And then her hands caught the stone. Just her hands. Fingers screaming. Nails breaking against the rough edge of a window casement. Her whole weight hanging from 10 fingers and the will to live. She did not let go. She would not let go. She had run from that church to live. She had bitten through a man's hand to live. She had not come this far to die on the side of a king's palace. Slowly, shaking, she pulled herself back, got 1 foot onto the ledge, then the other, pressed her cheek to the cold stone and breathed, just breathed. For one trembling moment, then she kept moving. A hand shot out of the window behind her, grasping, catching the trailing silk of her gown. The fabric tore, but she was already past his reach, already at the balcony, already throwing one leg over the carved railing. Then the other, hauling herself up and over and down onto solid ground. The balcony doors swung open, and the Duke of Ravenscroft stood there. His mask was gone. His face was bare and stark and wild with a fear she had never seen on him. Not once. Not even when Garrett had stood in his own hall, and when he saw her, alive, climbing over that railing with her gown in ruins and her hands bleeding, the fear broke open. And what poured out of it was something so naked it nearly undid her. Adelaide. He crossed the distance in 3 strides and pulled her into the room. Into a study full of palace guards and officials who had gathered there, away from the smoke. Into his arms, his men, she gasped. They tried to take me. In the smoke. I know. We caught 2 of them on the stairs. He had her by the shoulders, his eyes moving over her, frantic, cataloging every scrape. The fire was small, contained to one room. He set it himself. A distraction, his hands were shaking. Those were feared man in England. His hands were shaking. I couldn't find you. In all of it, I couldn't find you. And I thought, I'm here. She caught his face in her bleeding hands. Crispin, I'm here. A palace official stepped forward and bowed. Your Grace. The building is secured. But Mr. Holloway was seen leaving through the servants' entrance. We can still pursue him. Let him run, the Duke said. He did not look away from her when he said it. Let him run. He has shown his hand to half the kingdom tonight. He set a fire in the king's own palace. He tried to abduct a woman in front of 300 witnesses. Now he turned to the official, and his voice was iron again. By morning, every door in London will be closed to him. The charges will be filed at first light. The Calais papers go to the magistrate tonight, and the men he bribed? Adelaide asked, a thin, cold smile. Already deciding that it is safer to testify against him than to hang beside him. They left the palace an hour later. The smoke had cleared, the guests had gone, carrying the story out into the night like 100 lit candles. By dawn, all of England would know. The scarred Duke, the runaway bride, the villain who set fire to a palace and fled into the dark, and the truth, at last, set loose where no whisper could bury it. In the carriage, Adelaide leaned her head against his shoulder. She was exhausted past the edge of what she had thought a body could hold. Her hands were wrapped in a guard's handkerchief. Her gown was ruined beyond saving. She had never felt so alive. You climbed along a ledge, he said quietly. 3 stories up. I didn't really have a choice. You always have a choice. He turned his head, and his lips brushed her hair. You chose to be brave. I chose to live. She closed her eyes. There's a difference. But just now, I can't remember what it is, he laughed. A real one, low and warm and astonished, as though he had forgotten he could. The next morning, she woke to find a small box on the table beside her bed. She opened it slowly. Inside, resting on dark velvet, was a ring, heavy gold, set with a single deep red stone, and engraved into the band the wolf's head crowned with thorns, the signet of the Duchess of Ravenscroft, the real one. She found him in his study, exactly where she had first found his secrets. When she came in, holding the box, he looked up, and for the first time since she had known him, the Duke of Ravenscroft looked almost afraid. The ring, she said. It belongs to the Duchess of Ravenscroft. He set down his pen. The real one. Not the part you've been playing. He stood. Came around the desk. Somewhere between the night I burned those papers and the moment I watched you climb along that ledge, I stopped pretending, Adelaide. I don't want a duchess for show. I don't want a weapon against Holloway. I want you, in this cold house, which has not felt like a home in 5 years. Until you walked into it, she looked down at the ring, at the crest, at the man who had given her ashes when he could have given her chains. I want to stay, she said. Really stay. Not because I've nowhere else to go. She lifted her eyes to his. But because I choose you. I choose this. Then it's yours, he's. If you want it. She crossed the room, took the ring from the box, and slid it onto her own finger. It fit perfectly. She held out her hand, watching the red stone catch the morning light. How do I look? He took her hand, brought it to his lips, in a gesture so tender it made her throat ache. Like a duchess, he said, like a woman who saved herself, and was generous enough to let me come along, she laughed, and pulled him close, and kissed him, soft at first, then not soft at all, and when they finally broke apart, he was smiling, that rare whole smile that changed his entire ruined face. The scars did not vanish. They never would, but they were only lines now, the marks of a man who had walked through fire and refused to let it make him cruel. Welcome home, Duchess, he said. Welcome home, Duke. Outside, London was waking to the news. Garrett Holloway's name was already turning to poison in every drawing room and coffee house in the city. The trial would be a spectacle. The fall would be complete. And the girl from Calais and all the others would finally someone to answer for them. But inside Ravenscroft Hall, none of that mattered yet. Inside, Two broken people who had found each other and the worst hour of both their lives were building something new. Something chosen. Something free. Adelaide had run from one life straight into another. But this time, she had not run away from anything. This time, she had run toward it. And that, she thought, looking at the ring on her finger and at the man beside her, that made all the difference.